They say the ghoul stars do not answer. The oldest voidfarers avoided that reach of space without reasoned cause, tracing their flight paths in ancient curvature around its periphery, like monks afraid to speak aloud in cursed sanctuaries. There were no wars remembered there. There were no Chartist runs or Mechanicus survey paths. Only the suggestion, the quiet insinuation, that it was a place set aside. Not by decree, but by something more enduring. Something woven into the fabric of human perception. An ancient war, perhaps, forgotten by even the longest records, or a pacted silence made beneath a starless sky. Segmentum Ultima has known many threats. Tyrannid tendrils and Necron tomb wakes, warp storms that peel the skin from time. But the pale wasting did not rise with thunder, it fell with quiet. First, a relay station failed to respond. Trivial. Then a scout frigate failed to report. Common. Then an entire watch fort of the Death Watch ceased transmission. Silence, again, and again. A pattern emerged only when the pattern had grown too vast to be coincidence. The shape of an absence. The Segmentum command aboard the Strategium Bastiorum at Deathros 5 monitored the fade. They did not send a fleet. They sent a request. A prayer wrapped in transmission, directed to the chapter house of the Nova Marines on Onurum. An ancient chapter with roots in the lineage of Ultramar. A force both methodical and unwavering. They would investigate. What happened next was never recorded in full. When the Nova Marines returned, they returned alone. 12 chapters had crossed into the theatre. Only one remained whole. 11 vanished, their names withheld, their banners struck from remembrance, their gene seed never recovered. The Nova Marines did not speak of the pale wasting, not to the Ordo Xenos, not to their brother chapters, not even to the Adeptus Terra when formerly commanded. Their silence became sacred, ossified by decades of sanctioned censure. Their librarians bore new scars upon their minds. Their chaplains carried new canticles whose words none outside their walls have heard. They reforged their rituals, changed the purity seals of their armor, retired entire patterns of bolter scripture and replaced them with glyphs not found in Imperial archives. The silence that returned with them was not the same as the silence that had preceded. The former had been vacancy. The latter was denial. No Imperial world was ever formally quarantined, yet 37 systems were quietly withdrawn from cartographic registers. Mechanicus scout orders redirected. Navi's nobility routes revised under the pretext of void tides. The region, once charted by the stars that ringed the Ghoul cluster, was excised. It was not declared forbidden. It simply ceased to be referenced. The maps no longer needed to lie. They simply left room for forgetting. In the black vaults of Ordo Malleus Thalasarum, the pale wasting bears only one classification: Heresia Memetica, Tia Theta Exilis. The note beside it reads, "Further inquiry not advised." Auditory exposure linked to onset of recursive nightmare phenomenon in sanctioned psychers. What makes this conflict unique is not the number of dead, not the nature of its enemy, not even the obliteration of 11 entire chapters from the Astartes annals. What sets it apart is the sound it made. None. No survivor has ever named what they faced. No warrior has recorded their dreams in ink. No war cry, no litany, no last stand was ever transmitted. The pale wasting was not a battle, it was a vanishing. And still, the silence deepens. In the early stages, before the silence had congealed into certainty, the Imperium responded with its usual cadence. Delays masked as deliberation, data wrapped in ritual, command decisions lost in the grinding mass of bureaucracy. What few signals emerged from the Ghoul perimeter came shattered and irregular. Vox transmissions warped by interference that left no technical trace, images frozen mid-frame as if the machine spirit itself refused to witness. An Adeptus Mechanicus exploratory fleet, Valestine Theta, departed from the Forge Arc Cantic Voth with 7 Skitari maniples and 2 battalions of servitor-hardened labourers. Their mission, sanctioned by both Mars and Segmentum Ultima, was to restore contact with the relay voids surrounding the Nihilo cluster, just 2 sectors outward from what would later become the Pale Wasting's center. They did not vanish. They returned. But what they brought back was not coherence. It was fear. The Margos Explorator in command, Veshar Klin 2V, spoke of anomalies without form, gravity wells that bloomed and then ceased to exist, ambient psychic pressure with no detectable source, crew behaviors that became subtly erratic. Minor, at first. One engine seer reporting visions of impossible architecture, another requesting daily maintenance be performed in absolute silence. Within 2 weeks, all auditory speech on the vessel had ceased. Communication continued, but only via pictographs and manual data slate exchanges. Even the servitors, mechanically incapable of fear, began to register higher than normal cognition loops when exposed to certain visual fields. Klin's final report was a 6-minute hololith, heavily distorted, during which he displayed a series of images harvested from probe drones near an uncharted planetoid. Each image bore subtle differences in terrain. Not geological shifts, but symbolic. The alignment of stones, the emergence of structures from beneath the surface that were not present seconds prior. Glyphs that formed only in light-shadow contrast, visible only at certain solar angles. No machine could verify their reality, but the crew had seen them. Then came the conclusion of the hololith, simple, unadorned, and chilling in its phrasing. We are not watched, we are remembered. That is worse. After the Explorator fleet's return, Cantic Voth was placed under indefinite quarantine by the Ordo Xenos. Its machine spirit was dispersed, fragmented into 6 subcores, and interred beneath 6 separate forge worlds. The crew was dispersed across penal cohorts, and their memories scrubbed by sanctioned psychoscar. The name Valestine Theta was erased from the Martian registry. And still, the whisper persisted. Others followed. A silent Lucius Pattern reconnaissance bark was found drifting between systems in the Alcorin expanse, its hull unbreached, its systems intact. Every crew member was accounted for, seated in their duty positions. None were dead. None were alive. Their minds had been voided, neither brain death nor stasis, a blankness that no biologist division could categorize. The bark's Auspex logs repeated a single phrase in low-priority sublayer vox. Memory is proximity. Even the Death Watch, masters of threshold warfare, began to notice the pattern. Kill teams deployed for retrieval operations returned with fragmented recollections, encountering entities, or perhaps concepts, that changed their shape based on the fear of the observer. One watch captain from the Iron Lords described the threat in only 3 words before taking his own life during debrief. There was intention. From the edge of charted space, as if clawing out from beneath the weight of aeons, the pale wasting revealed not a presence, but a persistence. The kind of malignancy that does not press forward, but pulls. A slow inversion of certainty. Some suspected a Tyranid subfleet, one adapted to psychic erasure. Others whispered of Necron relic weapons unearthed in a pre-war tomb world. Still more invoked long-silenced heresies, alien linguistics believed capable of rewriting cognitive architecture through exposure alone. Yet the Ordo Malleus refused jurisdiction. Demonology was absent. The warp showed no signs of incursion. It was something else. Entire regiments began requesting transfer from border systems without formal cause. Administratum clerks recorded rising psychosis levels among void navigators posted near the ghoul stars. Even astropaths, sightless and scarred by their proximity to the Emperor, began to weep uncontrollably when tasked with transmissions to the sector. One by one, the edges frayed. Nothing came outward from the ghoul stars, nothing visible, no fleet, no xenoform, no crusade or herald. What came was a forgetting, and through that forgetting, something entered. What must a chapter of the Adeptus Astartes become to survive when 11 others fall? There are many kinds of survival in the Imperium. Some are victories recorded in scripture. Others are burdens dragged through time like broken armor across a battlefield. The Nova Marines returned from the Pale Wasting bearing their colors intact, their gene seed secured, their fortress monastery uncompromised. but none who beheld them in the years that followed mistook them for a force unchanged. Survival, in this case, was neither triumph nor absolution. It was a wound that had not yet found the words to bleed. 12 chapters entered the Pale. Only one returned. The identities of the 11 lost remain unreleased. The Inquisition sealed those records with such severity that even mention of the associated founding cohorts was expunged. Not lost to data corruption or battlefield destruction, but erased surgically, ritually, completely. Even chapters once considered successors of the lineages involved have remained silent, their genealogical rights redirected, their recruitment traditions altered. A whole strand of Astartes' legacy was folded inward and sealed, not shamed, not disgraced, removed. Only the Nova Marines spoke, and only once. 3 years after their return, a conclave of vigilance was held on Ultima Segmentum's outermost bastion, Vigil 9, a moon fortress once reserved for monitoring Necron stirs in the Archon's eye. The chapter master of the Nova Marines at the time, Demetrios Thane, delivered a single address to the assembled inquisitors and representatives of 5 other chapters. No transcript survives, no recording was permitted. But those who emerged from the gathering bore the marks of revelation. One of the inquisitors present, Meroth Halvaran, Ordo Xenos, retired into silent penance the following day and was not seen again until his death, 30 years later, aboard a black ship bound for Terra. His notes, retrieved posthumously, speak only in parables. One line remains scorched into the data slate's core frame. We looked into a mirror held in another's hand. The hand recoiled. The mirror did not. The Nova Marines returned diminished in number, but not broken. Their librarians no longer served in open capacities for almost a century. Their chaplains conducted revised rites, ancient Astartes litanies rewritten, with verses removed and others introduced from unknown derivation. Their fortress monastery on Honorum underwent architectural shifts, entire wings restructured without explanation, sacred spaces sealed, shrines defaced and rebuilt under new symbology. They no longer served in joint theatre operations. Even requests for their support by Ultramarines High Command were deferred or redirected. Yet the Nova Marines were not exiled. They were not censured. In fact, they were honoured. Commendations granted at the highest levels. Their purity record, examined and found unblemished. Their gene seed assessed and judged stable. And still, they were left alone. For over a century, the Nova Marines received no reinforcements. No aspirants were drawn from their usual recruiting worlds. When questioned, the chapter offered no explanation. One watch commander of the Death Watch, himself of Nova Marine blood, was asked during an after-action report why his chapter had closed its gates to recruitment. His response was brief. The gates were never closed, only the path to them. The 11 lost remain unnamed, but echoes of them linger. One fragment, drawn from a post-battle data core found adrift near the remnant of Tanth, depicts a moment of conflict within the Pale. The recording is short, 42 seconds, and incomplete. A squad of Astartes, unidentified by heraldry, appears amid smoke and dissonant vox interference. They are engaged in formation, though no enemy is visible. At Mark 17, one of the Marines halts, turns his weapon on his battle brothers, and opens fire. The others do not respond. They do not fall. They do not bleed. They look at him. And then the image folds inward, pixelating not through mechanical failure, but through a recursive distortion that spirals like a sigil trying to inscribe itself across the machine's vision. Some believe the 11 were erased for heresy, others for failure. Still others claim their deaths were a mercy, their fates sealed not by battle, but by knowledge. Whatever the truth, they are not commemorated. No inscriptions, no epithets. Their company numbers were never reissued, their victories removed from official annals, their armories disassembled and distributed across disassociated forces. But within the librarius of the Nova Marines, hidden behind tenfold sanctum wards, it is said that a wall remains. One wall, sealed from view, lined with the helms of 11 unspoken brethren. No chapter forgets its own. Not truly, not ever. Before the pale wasting became a name sealed in whisper and obscuration, it unfolded beneath another title, one half-remembered, barely spoken, the harrowing. It was never declared. No proclamation rang across the fleet commands of the segmentum. There was no opening maneuver, no spear thrust of banners through space. Only movement. Orders drawn in incomplete phrases. Ship deployments without sighted enemy. Regiments recalled without explanation. From the outermost bastions to the inner sanctums of the Inquisition, the harrowing was understood only through consequence, that something had begun. Those who served in the harrowing recall a war that moved like smoke, present, choking, and intangible. Imperial Guard forces stationed near the Ghoul Stars were first to experience the shift, combat assignments that dissolved midway through transit, objectives that ceased to exist upon arrival. One regiment, the 93rd Deteran Rifles, was assigned to garrison a world called Valus Primaris. The planet was confirmed in historical records, charted across 3 maps, mentioned in Adeptus Administratum tithe reports as recently as M34. When the 93rd arrived, there was nothing. Not ruin, not wreckage, no orbital debris or tectonic upheaval, no warp scars, just empty void. Their ships circled coordinates where a planet should have been. They waited, they reported, they were told to proceed, and so they did, never speaking of it again. Within months, multiple sectors experienced a rise in low-grade psychic interference. Not the screaming of demonic ingress, not the dissonance of warp storms. A subtler thing, an increase in miscommunication between navigators, pattern loss in astropathic relays, emotive bleed, fear, sorrow, guilt, transmitted between psychers like infections. Some began to dream of lattice-thin cities beneath bloodless moons. Others described a vast shadow behind the stars, seen only when not looked for. The black ships intensified their purges, not because of chaos, but because too many were dreaming the same dream. Inquisitorial kill teams deployed under what few authorizations could be assembled in time. Most reported incomplete contact. Those that returned brought back reports of phenomena ill-suited to classification. Not anomalies, phenomena. Things that existed but did not behave. Signs in gravity displacement fields that rewrote themselves while being observed. Entire cities evacuated without breach, their infrastructure untouched, their Vox systems endlessly repeating the same 27-second clip. A single voice whispering remembrance is treachery. When the harrowing reached its peak, the effects were no longer isolated. The Inquisition attempted to isolate the spread through brute doctrinal force, record excisions, memory purges, systemic redirections. It failed. One of the most documented incidents took place on Vortimaris, an agri-world renowned for its vast lichen-choked oceans and coral ridges harvested for industrial solvent. A garrison of Crimson Castellans was stationed on world, guarding a strategic refinery nexus. One morning, the Vox relays ceased transmission. When Segmentum Command finally dispatched a recon vessel, they found the Castellan's fortress intact, its gates sealed. Every defensive position was manned, every weapon trained outward, but no hearts beat within. The gene seed extraction rituals had been performed on every Astartes, even though none bore wounds. The apothecarian had been active, but no apothecaries remained. The command log spoke of an approaching presence. A weeping silence, as it was termed, that encircled the planet like a siege. The Castellans had waited. No enemy came. The silence deepened, and something inside them broke. At this point, the harrowing collapsed inward, no longer a military action, but a spiritual blight. Chaplains began to falter in their litanies. Canonical faiths fractured under the weight of questions no imperial creed could answer. The word of the Emperor was unchanging, but those who heard it in their hearts began to feel a second voice beneath it, one that echoed rather than opposed, one that offered not temptation, but reflection, and reflection is ruin. It was then that the pale wasting emerged, not as a new threat, but as a name for what the harrowing had always been becoming, not merely a conflict, a transition, from knowing to unknowing, from battle to unmaking. There was no moment of declaration, but those who faced it began to mark their rights in ash, not ink. and in every seal burned into the hatches of drop pods, one sigil began to appear in trembling hand, a broken circle enclosing nothing. The worlds touched by the pale wasting did not burn, they did not bleed, they changed. Across the eastern rim of Segmentum Ultima, planets long held within the Imperium's compliant register began to diverge from their histories. Subtly at first, rites altered by unnoted scribes, cathedra reorganized with unfamiliar statuary, planetary leaders appointed with no memory of elevation. These were not the signs of rebellion. No heresies had yet bloomed. These were alterations of alignment. Like a cathedral shifted a degree eastward, so its spire now points to an absence. On Serenthine IV, a shrine world celebrated for the sanctity of St. King Balthazar's tomb, the ecclesiarchy dispatched a reliquary retinue to oversee a tricennium renewal of its sacred vaults. When they arrived, they found the basilica intact, the tomb untouched. But the prayers had changed. Not warped, not reimagined. They were perfectly ordered, perfectly phrased, consistent in syntax and script, but they were not the prayers sanctioned by the Ministorum. The names of saints were replaced by others not found in any hagiography. The parables echoed familiar rhythms, but shifted in emphasis, extolling vigilance not against sin, but against memory. The local priests could not explain the change. They had been teaching the same liturgies for generations. Their memory held nothing amiss. On the forge world of Ceprius Magna, a Martian enclave second only to Ryza in thermic pattern munitions, the Adeptus Mechanicus experienced a different fracture. Servitor crews began constructing devices not in the sanctioned archives. The blueprints were unfamiliar, yet bore the sigils of verified standard template constructs. Overseer tech priests, upon interrogating their own memories, found entries that had always been there, and yet were not. When subjected to psychometric analysis by an inquisitorial cogitator, the fabrication orders showed no deviation. They were logged, ratified, and blessed. Only when cross-referenced with distant, uncorrupted forge worlds did the discrepancy emerge. Ceprius Magna had begun to manufacture things no one else understood, but had no knowledge of deviation. Their memory had adapted to the presence of these things. Adaptation that arrived not through contact, but contagion. Astartes librarians began to notice variations in the Codex Astartes. Marginal differences, small tactical shifts in clause, altered interpretations of siege doctrine, newly cited engagements in sectors without records of such conflicts. When queried, these librarians swore by their recollection. They had always known these entries. Their minds showed no sign of tampering. Some suspected warp meddling, others genetic impurity. But none could point to a moment of change. The data had always been thus, until it wasn't. On Morven's shield, a penal moon used by the Astra Militarum to intern dishonoured officers, reports emerged of entire prisoner cohorts suddenly fluent in dialects never heard before. These were not alien tongues, nor chaos chants, but structured, precise languages with defined grammar, spoken with fluency even by those who had no prior exposure. One linguist, sent to transcribe the phenomenon, noted that the language was recursive, that it seemed to rewrite its own definitions with each usage. When asked to explain, he replied only, "Meaning is pressure, memory is shape." Within months, Morven's shield ceased transmission. No final message, no declaration of revolt. The next supply vessel found the moon's surface untouched. Its personnel were gone. No trace remained, but a single phrase burned into the iron gates. "We are remembered, therefore we cease." By now, a grim pattern emerged. Worlds near the edge of the ghoul stars had become not sites of war, but of alteration. Something had passed through them, or perhaps lingered just beyond them. And wherever it touched, it did not corrupt. It redefined. There were no marks of xeno-incursion, no spore trails of tyrannid consumption, no warp breach fractures or iconoclasm. There was only the reordering of truth, a sculpting of belief. Memory was no longer a tether, it had become a vector. Those who noticed the change did so with increasing rarity. Most adjusted, unaware. The ones who remembered the world as it had been were treated as anomalies, their testimony considered delusion or heresy. To recall the original pattern became a form of dissent, a kind of treason only the soul recognized. And so, with each passing cycle, the pale wasting continued, not by conquest, but by replacement. The stars did not go out, they remained. But the names of those stars, the prayers spoken beneath them, the history taught to those who gazed upward, all changed, all endured, none remained the same. There are afflictions that move faster than flame and speak clearer than tongues. Some hunt flesh, some tear at spirit. The pale wasting spread through neither, yet hollowed both. To call it a contagion is to lean on familiar terror, plagues of gene rot, viral scours, weaponized pestilence crafted by heretic minds, or the cruel alchemy of chaos. But this was no disease. No biological vector was traced. No pathogen isolated. And still, across sectors adjacent to the ghoul stars, minds began to shift. Not degrade, not collapse. Shift. The earliest reports came from astropaths, always the first to feel the tremor of what words cannot yet carry. Choirs that once sang in harmony began to lose coherence, not through noise or pain, but dissonance in comprehension. They would receive messages accurately, down to the final phoneme, and still misunderstand. Intent began to detach from phrase, syntax from meaning. Comprehension drifted. Some described it as a second voice beneath the first. Others simply wept and spoke no more. On Bastion Foros, a fortress planet turned relay hub for subsector communications, an entire cohort of Lex mechanics was sequestered after 37 simultaneous transcription errors. When interrogated, they defended their translations with perfect logic. The source texts, when compared, were unaltered. The Mechanicus tech adepts assigned to analysis declared the phenomena sub-informatic drift, a deviation in understanding not sourced in data, but in the cognitive architecture of the receiver. To think had become hazardous. Inquisitor Halvara Sin, Ordo Xenos post-obscuration edict, classified the condition under a newly coined designation, mimetic incursion by crypto-hazardous syntax. Her observation was stark. The pale wasting is not an enemy. It is a grammar, one that does not require your consent to be spoken through you. Among librarians of the Adeptus Astartes, resistance was slightly higher, until it wasn't. A librarian of the Genesis chapter, Brother Adept Malaro, entered a deep meditative trance following contact with a wasting-afflicted relic site on the moon, Harnax Sentinel. When roused, he claimed to have seen a library of impossible architecture, whose books contained only blank pages that altered as he imagined their contents. The stronger his will, the more precise the text became. When asked what knowledge he had retrieved, he tore out his tongue with his gauntlet and scrawled a single sigil in blood. That sigil, later identified as a recursive logic loop, caused 2 deaths among the Cryptologos team assigned to decode it. Their thoughts had simply stopped. No stress, no trauma, no rupture. Just cessation. Across the segmentum, isolated enclaves began to develop linguistic drifts, variants of High Gothic not sourced in dialectical evolution, but in infection. Liturgical chants altered phonetically by fractions of syllables. Recitations of the catechisms of the Omnissiah that inserted new self-referential phrases. What is built recalls. What recalls constructs. What constructs erases. At first, such changes were attributed to heretical miscopy, but they were consistent. Identical errors across sectors too distant for coordination. The Inquisition intensified their purges. Entire monasteries were sealed, Vox networks severed, choirs silenced. But the changes had already rooted themselves, not in data, but in minds. To know of the pale wasting was to be vulnerable to it. Awareness became the conduit. Contagion through cognition. What makes this affliction singular among Imperial records is that it bore no agency. There was no will, no malice, no desire. No enemy presence declared it. No ship traced its source. But it moved. It fed on exposure. It grew in reflection. And above all, it reshaped not through domination, but through suggestion. Psychers subjected to pale exposure underwent cortical calcification at a cellular level. Their minds, overburdened by recursive perception, began to harden, not die, not shatter, but crystallize in loops of unsolvable recognition. One autopsy revealed a psychic cortex folded in a pattern identical to a sector-wide navigational map, a cartographic spiral centered on nothing. Some within the Ordo Malleus attempted to frame the wasting as warp-born, an echo of some dormant demonic concept. But the warp remained unnaturally still where it touched the pale. No shrieking demons, no raw insanity, just pattern. And so, a darker theory emerged, that the pale wasting was not a weapon, but a statement. A phrase left incomplete. A thought abandoned by something else, Xenos perhaps, or something predating even the age of the old ones. A message written not in language, but in alteration itself. To understand it was to rewrite yourself. To resist it was to forget. And to speak of it at all risked making it whole again. There are vaults in the Imperium that no key may unlock, sealed not with locks or hexagrammic wards, but by the silence of those who choose never to speak. The pale wasting resides in such places. By the late stages of the crisis, the Ordo Xenos had moved from denial to containment. The threat could not be confronted in the field, for the field itself was no longer definable. Tactical parameters collapsed. Intelligence reports altered themselves between debrief and archive. Weapons failed not mechanically, but conceptually. Ammunition fired into non-response, as if the target had not yet chosen whether to be struck. Conventional force, that cornerstone of Imperial dominance, became moot. The Inquisition turned inward. At Watch Cell Veritas Vox on Pranction, an entire chamber was converted into a black library derivative. No digital system was trusted. Every record transcribed by hand, every testimony engraved in sanctified adamantine plates, stored in vaults accessible only by physically transported access skulls. Within these etched recollections were patterns of experience, not coherent descriptions, but motifs. Soldiers speaking of dreams with indistinct gravity. Adepts unable to pass their own names. Saints who had never lived now spoken of with reverence by entire pilgrim routes. The Ordo Malleus filed 3 separate heretical designations for the wasting: Lex Obscura, Reflexus, Vox Muta, Class Null, and Nullum Nomen, Pathogenum Cognita. Each tried to contain it in a framework of understanding. None held. For every new classification, the pale seemed to shift slightly, always just outside reach, as if it adjusted itself each time it was seen too clearly. Even the Inquisitors themselves were not immune. One, Kiros Halleck, Ordo Xenos High Interlocutor, dissolved his own conclave after witnessing the fate of Watch Station Belius 9. The station had housed survivors from the outermost pale contact zones. No breach occurred. No virus spread. But over the course of 2 weeks, the station's culture began to shift. Rituals changed. Habits formed without instruction. Picked feed archives later revealed officers placing their boots beside their beds at identical angles. Crew members walked corridors in synchronized steps. New banners were woven. No source, no order given. The banners bore no icon, only a series of progressively vanishing lines, a pattern of subtraction. When asked what had happened, Kairos replied, "We caught up to the memory of an answer never spoken." He sealed the station, ordered its incineration from orbit, then sealed the order itself, redacted from his own personal record. The rare few who retain fragments of authority over such knowledge refer to the pale wasting as a pattern event, a phrase used only in reference to phenomena that defy codified causality. A pattern event is not a war, not a plague. It is a deviation that becomes self-sustaining. Once begun, it requires no further agent. The act of knowing completes it. There are whispers that the pale wasting never ended, that it could not, that it continues in containment not because the Imperium defeated it, but because those who survived stopped speaking of it. Not from cowardice, from strategy. Some theorize that silence itself is the only bastion, that each time the Pale is remembered, its shape attempts to reform. And so, the highest orders of the Inquisition, acting in grim accord with selected chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, chose obliteration over testimony. Every trace of the 11 lost chapters was not merely buried, it was unravelled. Their names, their worlds, their relics, all excised with surgical precision, so thoroughly that not even myth remained. Only the Nova Marines held fragments, only they returned. Even within their ranks, access to those memories is limited. Those who served in the Pale are sequestered, their minds fortified by ritual ablutions and mnemonic sheathing drawn from ancient ultramarine psychodiscipline. They carry their knowledge as wounds, not proudly, not openly, but as burdens wrapped in ceremonial silence. And still, beneath the black vaults of the Ordo Xenos on Bastiorum Prime, a single door remains sealed under triple cog mechanized guard. Above it, no plaque, no heraldry, only a glyph, scorched into the steel, a broken circle. Inside it, nothing. Where the Pale wasting passed, it left no ruins, only questions too structured to be accidental. On the world of Silhark, a death world ringed with ossified coral and plagued by metachronal storms, an Adeptus Mechanicus survey team found a valley of bones. Not a battlefield, a deposition. The remains were laid in deliberate geometry, long curvatures aligning with planetary tidal axes, vertebral spirals coiled around eroded mineral outcroppings. Not one skull remained. And yet every long bone had been etched with grooves, data inscription patterns with no data to retrieve. The explorator in charge, Magos Heth Valin, documented 327 such sites over 9 years of planetary exploration. When asked for a summation, she recorded only a single phrase before initiating self-purification. These were not graves, they were diagrams. Throughout the Ghoul periphery, similar discoveries emerged, always subtle, always incomplete. On the planetoid known as Parallax's wake, an Imperial surveyor named Rekeldaran located a latticework of subterranean tunnels that matched, meter for meter, the circulatory map of a human heart scaled to planetary size. No signs of habitation, no tool marks, no deviation. When he traced the central chamber, it opened to a cavity filled not with technology or remains, but sound, a deep, oscillating drone. Not mechanical, vocal. He never left the chamber. The Vox feed captured only his final breath, followed by silence. Some relics were physical, tangible. A spearhead made of folded reality metal, found buried within a glacier on Foltar 6, that registered simultaneously as both warm and cold to sensory equipment. Not Xeno, not demon, material of unclassified origin. When presented to a conclave of Ordo Xenos Archmagisters, it was declared inert. But during transportation, the transport crew began dreaming in synchrony. Visions of a tower with no base and a voice repeating, "To be known is to end." The dreams ceased only when the artifact was sealed in triple-phase stasis and jettisoned into the gravity well of a black star. There are temples now built above these sites, not by choice, by necessity. The Imperium's answer to that which it cannot destroy is often enshrinement, to sanctify what resists classification. On the world of Dathros, a convent of the Order of the Argent Veil maintains a vigil atop a canyon that rearranges its shape every decade. The sisters have no memory of building the bastion. Their archives begin at arrival. No date precedes it. Their rites are strange. Each day begins with silence. No hymns, no liturgies. Just an hour of stillness beneath a sky that flickers unnaturally at the edges. Their candles burn without wicks. Their saints bear no names. When asked why they remain, the canoness replied, "Because we are the punctuation. And until the sentence ends, we hold." Even the warp avoids these places. Navigators report calm void passage near pale zones, so calm, in fact, that the Astronomicon dims. No demons stir, no echoes call. Only a hush, deeper than void, a suppression of presence. Some warp savants believe the pale zones are where thought goes to die. Not belief, not denial, just the absence of apprehension. What remains in the wake of the pale wasting is neither devastation nor decay. It is resonance, residual shape without message, architecture without occupant, pattern without hand. And perhaps that is the truest horror, that the pale wasting did not build anything. It left behind the marks of having passed. Its message was the void between things. Its relics are ossuaries, not because they hold death, but because they suggest the space where something once stood. Or worse, where something could stand again, should remembrance tilt its gaze too near. On the rim of Segmentum Ultima, an orbital auger station drifts near the former world of Trinity Ascendancy. Once every 59 days, it receives a pulse, not signal, not language, just a shape, a broken circle, always the same. The Adeptus Mechanicus has long since disabled its receivers. The station's servitors still record it. The Imperium is built on remembrance. Cathedrals stand upon graves not for beauty, but for function. Each stone a memory, each pillar a prayer against forgetting. History is not kept to be studied. It is weaponized. Against chaos, against Xenos, against time itself. Yet the pale wasting remains untouched by that weapon. Not because it withstood it, but because it required a different truth. That to remember it clearly was to bring it back. In the aftermath, no formal campaign was logged, no medals issued. The Nova Marines were thanked in person by 3 Lords of Terror, and then never summoned again. Imperial scholars tasked with writing after-action reports were found dead or insane before their ink dried. Not slain, not corrupted, broken by implication. As if the act of recording condensed the presence of what had been. The pale wasting was not an enemy. It was a moment in history that rewrote its own margins. A scarring of narrative. A disruption of consequence. No system is designed to manage an absence that asserts itself. And yet, some remembrance always lingers. In the vaults of the Librarium of Thalassa Prime, deep beneath its 5th substrata, a single corridor bears no designation. The cogitators refuse to name it. The Mechanicus denies building it. And still, the corridor exists. A stasis field seals its end. Within that stasis, a fragment of gene seed rotates, preserved perfectly. Its helix does not match any known chapter. No identification has ever succeeded. An Inquisitor once asked the Nova Marines if it belonged to one of the 11. The answer came not in words, but in ritual. 12 brothers, kneeling in silence, their helmets removed, their eyes closed. Each bore a tattoo across their scalp, a broken circle, inked in ash. At the hour's end, they rose, donned their helms, and left. No answer was given. None was needed. Some speak of a rising, not a return of the pale wasting, but a re-emergence of its implications. Certain discrepancies in Imperial records, battle honours for regiments that never served, victory plaques for wars never fought, have begun to surface again. Not often, just enough. A suggestion. The pale wasting taught a lesson the Imperium will never admit aloud, that there are ways of losing which leave no ruin. That silence can consume louder than fire. That absence can weigh more than matter. For the Ordo Xenos, the final directive remains unaltered. Do not pursue remnants, do not study affliction, do not name the shape. The Nova Marines continue to serve, with honour, with resolve. But when asked of the pale wasting, they speak with one voice, always the same. It ended, we do not recall how. In the cold vaults of Segmentum Ultima, beneath the bureaucratic ossuary of 1,000 forgotten crusades, a single sigil waits on the edge of a data slate untouched for 200 years. A broken circle, enclosing nothing. And beneath it, a final line. We will know when it begins again, because we will remember what we never learned.